Welcome, history fanatics, to Mrs. Heron's video playlist, where you will get the best of the best in social studies. We are working on Unit 3, Africa. Our goal for this unit is to analyze the impact of geography on history, culture, population, government, and the economy of Africa. This unit is split up into 3 chapters. Chapter 6, West and Central Africa. Chapter 7, Southern and Eastern Africa. And Chapter 8, North Africa. West Africa had 3 early empires: Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. All 3 depended on trade to build and sustain their kingdoms, and in 750 AD, Western kingdoms began to trade gold for salt with the North African kingdoms. This probably sounds silly to you because salt is so cheap today, but keep in mind that without salt, people could not survive. This was a major problem in West Africa, where there was a tremendous salt shortage. However, West Africa had an abundance of gold, which they had no need for. The Arabs exchanged their salt with the West African gold, which became known as the salt trade. Aside from salt, the Arab traders also traded religion and ideas with the people of West Africa, leading to the 3 kingdoms mentioned earlier. The first was Ghana, which was in power for around 600 years. The modern-day country of Ghana was surprisingly not in the Ghana Empire. Anyway, the empire grew too quickly and its resources could not support its population. When the Kingdom of Mali attacked Ghana, they were easily defeated, leading to the second ancient kingdom, Mali. Mali was led by the wealthiest person in all of human history with an estimated value of $400 billion, Mansa Musa. To put that into perspective, Bill Gates is worth about $136 billion. His reign was short-lived, only about 25 years. However, he gained quite the reputation in that time. He was a practicing Muslim, and he fulfilled his Hajj to Mecca in 1324. Where he wanted to show the world how wealthy he was. He took 60,000 animals in his caravan and so much gold that he messed up the entire global economy. 240,000 pounds of gold, to be exact. Oops. This is why he is often depicted holding a gold nugget in ancient maps of West Africa. Shortly after Mansa Musa's death, his empire fell to the Songhai Empire. The Songhai Empire was the largest in Africa's history. It controlled famous cities like Timbuktu and Jen. However, this vast empire collapsed after just 200 years. By the end of the last major kingdom, European colonization threatened the region. West and Central Africa began to just trade gold with Europeans, but this quickly escalated into brutal slave trade. The slave trade had been around in West and Central Africa for centuries prior to this, but the European slave trade was much more intense and it affected a lot more people than ever before. Within 100 years, Europeans began to bring slaves to the Americas in a trade route called the Atlantic slave trade. Slaves were often traded for material goods such as guns and cloth. Today, historians have no idea just how many slaves died on the horrible trip to the Americas. It's estimated to be at least in the thousands. This voyage could take 6 weeks or more, and slaves were crammed onto the ship with no living space. Very little food and water were provided. This harsh trip was known as the Middle Passage and resulted in the largest forced migration in human history of an estimated 13 million people. The slave trade still impacts the people of Africa and the Americas today. By the 1800s, the US and Europe began to take steps toward outlawing slavery. However, European nations began to seek rule over the African nations, which is called colonialism. If enough nations are taken over, an empire is created, which is called imperialism. By the 1900s, almost all of Africa was colonized by European empires. The fights over African nations were called the Scramble for Africa, and the native people of Africa could not fight the advanced European weapons to defend their land. Eventually, the more educated leaders of some of these colonies became frustrated and began to call for independence from the European nations. One leader was Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana. He wanted black Africans to unite together from all over the world, an idea known as Pan-Africanism. Shortly after, almost all of Western and Central colonies of Africa gained their independence. Sometimes this led to conflict over who should run the government and who should control the nation, which often led to military dictatorships. The Belgian Congo is one example where after just 5 years of independence, the nation fell into the hands of a violent military dictator named Joseph Mobutu. He soon renamed the nation Zaire and remained in power for a brutal 32 years. Another example is the civil war in Nigeria over one ethnic group, the Igbo, threatening to leave the country and form their own nation called the Republic of Biafra. Between 500,000 and several million people died as a result of that conflict. The United States had a small part in this conflict during the Cold War, but by the 1990s, most African nations had established a stable form of democratic government with elected representatives. Some have done well, while others have failed, and conflict still remains an issue throughout the region today.